Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mr. Wilson here, just to show you a quick little tutorial on how to do digital painting, or one way to do digital painting. So what we're going to do today is I found this picture of a little happy bunny online holding an egg, and I went ahead, I've already labeled my layer, I've locked it off to make sure that I can't damage or do anything to it. So I'm going to make a brand new layer by coming over here. I'm going to call this color. Now, just to explain the method to the madness before we really get going, is what I'm going to do is create a base color throughout my character, and then I'm going to go and have an additional layer of shading on top of it. Now, you can do it by putting either all your colors on one layer, or we can do it on multiple. And I'm going to show you how to do both. So let's start with just the one, and I'm going to start with my bunny. So I'm going to come over here, click on here, grab in my hues, and I'm going to make him a purple bunny. Now, when I pick colors, you almost never want to grab a pure bright color. You always want to tone down the saturation and the brightness just a little bit. Remember, saturation, purity of color, brightness is up and down. So that's how dark it gets, fades off into black. So I'm going to grab a pretty bright, but not quite pure color on here. So I'm going to go ahead, hit this. Now I can, if I want to, sit here and try and fill in my whole thing. Now, if you're ever going to paint in a base layer, I recommend that 99% of the time, right click, turn your hardness all the way up. And what that does is it guarantees you get a nice sharp layer as you're doing your editing. It's not going to get fuzzy and overlap on something else. It's going to stick right to the size of your brush, and that's a good thing in this case. However, there's so much detail in this guy, it'll take forever if I sit here and try and paint him in manually. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use my paintbrush, or my paint bucket. Now, just because I'm a hotkey fanatic, B for brush, which is what I currently have, or G for gradient, but gradient also has the paint bucket underneath it, and that's why the hotkey is the same. So I'm going to stay on my brush just for a second. So again, B for brush is there. So I'm going to hit G for gradient, but if you look, it grabs me my gradient tool. But if I hold shift and hit the hotkey again, it will cycle through all of them that is in there. So if I hit it a second time, it grabs the paint bucket, and if I hold shift and continue to hit G, it'll go to the 3D one, back to the gradient, back to my paint bucket. So brush does the same thing. So if I hit B for brush, hold shift, it'll go to the pencil and go to a couple of the others. But I'm just going to stick with the regular brush, or more specifically, paint bucket for now. So now, as you know, or probably have seen, if I just come over here and click on it, it fills the whole screen. It doesn't have any borders to attach to. I don't have a selection, don't have anything like that. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to come up to the top, and there's a lot of tools that have this option in here, and that's my all layers. So I'm going to come over here, turn that on, and what that's going to do is it's going to pay attention to exactly where the color is. Now, just to show you, I can now come, click, click. Now, it doesn't always work perfectly, and let me show you what I mean. I'm going to zoom in on his face right here, and you can see I've actually got a couple of spots right here where it didn't show up. So I'm going to grab my brush, make it smaller, and I'm going to use my brackets. Left bracket or open bracket will make it smaller. Right bracket or closed bracket, same thing, makes it bigger. So I'm just going to kind of click and drag along the line right here just to add a little bit more to it, make sure I didn't miss anything. And Control 0, zoom it all the way back out. And if I look, I'm going to turn my line off just for a second, I've got my color here. Well, one of the things that I want to do, just to be on the safe side, is I want to make all of these borders a little bit bigger. I'm going to grab my paint bucket again, hit G, and with the same color, I'm just going to click on it a couple more times, and if you watch, you can see all of the color actually gets a little bit thicker. The more times I hit this, and I just want to do it 2 or 3 times, and now I pretty much have the whole thing covered. And just so you know, you can click and drag and just paint right over this, and that is entirely okay. You'll see why in just a few minutes. So I've got my color here. I need to get a color for his mouth, so I'm going to come over here, grab it, kind of like a pink mouth, so I'll give it right about there. So grab my paint bucket again, Again, I'm still on my color layer. I've got all layers selected. That's how I can do this. You know, click it 2 or 3 times. And then I'll come over here to color for my nose. Make it red. Again, I don't want a pure red. And another thing that's a bit of a pain with the paint bucket is sometimes you're not sure where the color is actually coming from. Is it coming from the paint bucket itself? Is it coming from that little arrow? If you ever hit caps lock, it turns it onto a little crosshair. See how it turns into a plus? And you can now see if I click right there, it's exactly. If I hit caps again, you can see it's coming from the little arrow up in the upper left. So I now have my colors for my bunny. Well, I'll get to the egg in just a moment. But you can see that I've now kind of screwed up my original line art. You can see that I've painted right over it. Now we haven't damaged it because it's locked, but let's put it down on the bottom so that our line art stays intact. Well, there's obviously a problem, and that is you can see that I can't see my color anymore. So what I'm going to do in order to do this, because I could grab my magic wand and start erasing, but one, it's time consuming, and two, there's a much easier way, and you want to work as non-destructively as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unlock this just for a moment, and I'm going to change my blending mode. Blending mode is a way of having the layer interact with everything underneath it. So I want my line art to show through, keep my black showing, but I want the white to disappear. And there's a blending mode to do that, and that is multiply. If I click multiply, boom, all of my line art perfectly preserved. So now, and again, that is because I had a pure white and a pure black going around on this. So, and you can see if I turn it off and turn it on, it doesn't quite match. So, alright, so I now have my art, which I'm going to lock again just to make sure I can't screw up again, and I've got my color. Well, I'm going to go ahead and make a second color at the moment, just to kind of show you what it looks like if you separate them. So I'm going to do this color 2. And this is going to be my egg. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to grab yellow. So come over here, grab kind of medium yellow, hit OK. Still got my paint bucket on. Boom. Click it 2 or 3 times just to kind of make sure it fills all the way up. Alright. So now I'm going to start my shading. So I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to call it shading. Now just so you know, you can do all of this on one layer. I highly recommend not doing it that way. If you ever decide that you want to change your color, you don't like your shading, whatever reason is, you can't fix it if it's all on one layer, or you can't easily fix it if it's all on one. If it's on multiple, all you have to do is turn it off. Say at some point in the distant future, I realize that I screwed up on my coloring when I did my egg. All I have to do is turn it off. Nice, simple, quick. It would take forever to repaint something like that. So I now have my shading. Well, I want to start off with the shadow. So start here. And rather than, and if you don't have your color, say you've still got a purple, or if you've grabbed something else, if you have your color picker, all you have to do is move the mouse over to the side, click on the color, and we can start with our base shape again. Well, I now want a darker color of exactly this. So to get that, I'm going to come over to my brightness and drag it straight down like that. Now, I'm going to get darker than I would probably ever need for the shadow, but that's okay. It's always easier to lighten or to darken than it is to lighten. So, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So, I'm going to start with and I'm now going to paint this in manually. So I'm going to grab my brush, right click, turn the hardness all the way down. So, and just kind of click once, you can see it's a little soft and fuzzy. Ctrl-Z will undo that. Now I'm going to give myself a bigger brush. Remember the brackets from earlier? Take that, make it bigger. I'm also going to take my opacity and turn it down to about somewhere between 30 and 50. So, make this a little bit bigger. And what I'm going to do now is just paint in where I want my shadow. And if I go over this multiple times, you'll see it start getting darker and darker and darker. Now you might be looking at this saying, wait, you're insane. I'm painting all over my egg. That's not good. I'm also painting over my bunny. And this is why we put colors on different layers. Because what this allows us to do, if we've done it this way, is it lets us use something called a clipping mask. Clipping mask, and let me just hide everything except for these two layers right now. What clipping mask is going to do is it's going to pay attention to the shape of the bottom layer, and it's going to just trim everything on that's been clipped above it to it. Let me show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to right click right on here and then create clipping mask. You can also get to this through your layer drop down. There's also a hotkey. I'll talk about that in a second. But you can see that now the shape of my bottom layer is controlling how big this is. You can see this arrow kind of is pointing down at the next one. So if I grab my move tool, you can even see that this is still here. You can see right to the edge of the screen. So this was my original artwork. I'm just moving it around. I can do the same thing. If I move my egg, my shading color stays in the same spot. I don't want to. I'm going to leave that right where it was. But now you can see I've got my shading here, and it automatically trims itself. Makes life a lot easier. So I'm going to turn on my line art just for a second and add some more into my shadow. So I'm going to now add a little bit more darkness. Oops. Make sure you are on your right layer when you are doing that. Just proving your point. Everyone makes mistakes. So I'm going to add some more darkness like right under his hand. Because it's always easier to build up shadows than it is to try and come through and remove them. You can. I'm actually going to in just a moment. So, in fact, I'm going to grab my eraser. So, E for eraser. Right click. Hardness all the way down. Turn my opacity down to about 25. Do the same thing. Make this bigger. Except now I'm going to give it a little bit of a highlight down on the bottom, just to make it look a little bit more interesting, like the light is bouncing off something else. So, alright. But yeah, that's the real quick way of doing shading if you're using a clipping mask. Now, let's say that you did like what we did with the bunny, and we've got all of this on its own layers right here. Now, you can still kind of do the same thing, except we can't get away with doing a clipping mask at all times because we've got these multiple different colors right here. So if I grabbed, in fact, just a demo very quickly. So I'm going to call this shading. By the way, I'll call this shading 2 just because this is color 2. Those two go together. So I got shading, color. Now going to grab my color for him. Grab my brightness down. And if I come through and start adding shading on this guy, and again, we'll make sure my opacity is kind of low, then you can see I can start coming in and adding it where I want. But if I overdo it, the purple, now in this case the purple and that actually doesn't look too bad, but in most cases, most circumstances, in fact if I go over that a couple of times, you can see that I've got the wrong color on here. That's where the clipping mask will fail me. So I could come through and keep doing, you know, my shading along like that and so forth. Right click, clipping mask, and while it'll trim off the outside, it does not do anything for here. So let me undo quite a few steps there. There we go. So what I'm going to do, and by the way, you can still use it. It just doesn't work when it goes from color to color like this. So I'm going to show you just in the last minute that I've got here that I'm going to come along like this. So if I want to do a separate color, what I have to do is make a selection on it. And what I'm going to do here is grab my magic wand. So again, W for quick select, Shift W switches me over to my magic wand. Again, I'm going to go to sample all layers, or I can click on my color one. Either one works. So I'm going to do sample all. I'm now going to grab this color here, make it darker, and I can paint right on my shading layer, and that's how I can do digital color.